For this hypothetical survival scenario, you wake up in a safe house in Bucharest with no memory of how you got there. A news report says you're wanted for a massacre at a nightclub. You find a burner phone with a single message that reads, "They set you up. You have 1 hour before Interpol locks down the borders. Find the package in the train station locker. Do not go to the airport. Trust no one." Just then, there's a knock at the door. Do you answer the door, armed and ready, or escape immediately through another exit?
I'm gonna find or make another exit, I think. I'm gonna hope that I've got a balcony or at least a window. And if not, I'm gonna have to find a way out through a wall, I guess, or a ceiling. That does not
Okay.
sound good.
Yeah. So you're kind of you're avoiding the escalation.
Yeah, until I know more, I'm gonna trust the one piece of information I have, which is to trust nobody.
Fantastic. So far, you are surviving. So since you're surviving, we will also ask you questions about your new book, which I have right here, by the way.
Great.
Midnight Black. Fantastic. Thanks for sending that along.
Sure.
Um, so your books immerse readers in criminal underworlds like places like Bucharest, Bulgaria, Russia. Can you tell us how much research do you do to bring these settings to life, and what's the most surprising thing you've learned during that process?
Well, specifically for this book, I've been to the Balkans, I've been to the Baltic, two locations that are in the book, but I wasn't able to go to Russia just because the security situation. If you're an American, you go to Russia right now, they're going to snatch you up and trade you back for some uh, somebody they have in the West that they want back, and that might take 2 weeks or 2 years, but it's not going to be a fun 2 weeks or 2 years. But fortunately for me, I have been to Russia before in the past, back when it was safe to do so. So I've spent a good amount of time in Moscow and some time in St. Petersburg as well. And both those locations feature in the book. I try and get to as many of the locations I can in my series as possible. I've been everywhere from Algeria and Ghana and Beijing and Estonia and all over Russia, South America. I like to do that for the writing. It definitely helps the writing. As far as the most surprising thing, I feel like at the time, specifically about location research, when I was down in Mexico researching a book about the cartels. It was not my intention to get into a dangerous area. So I stayed out of Sinaloa, but I got very near Sinaloa, and my understanding was it was pretty okay there. And when I got there, it was definitely not pretty okay. I was too far north. I was closer to the action than I wanted to be. I was basically in the middle of a sort of a civil war, and you're not that I was being chased by the cartels or shot at by the federales or anything like that, but I was just in an area where I was very much not welcome, and people were suspicious of me. And I probably, looking back, I shouldn't have been surprised that that was what was going on. But that was early in my career, and I don't make mistakes like that anymore, hopefully.
Got you. Got you. Do you have a favorite place that you've been?
Yeah, of all my research trips I've ever done, the best one I did was for a Gray Man book called Dead Eye, because it was in December and I went to Tallinn, Estonia, and Stockholm, Sweden, and Brussels and Hamburg, Germany, and it was all like in blizzard conditions, and it took ferries and things. And I live in Memphis, Tennessee. If we get a dusting of snow, it's like huge news. And to be in these blizzards and to just experience Christmas markets and things like that all by myself, just with a backpack, I think that's probably always going to be just this like, I was in a completely different world from my own, and I love that. But I've been to 39 countries researching these books, so there's a lot of cool experiences.
Yeah, amazing. All right, let's continue on with your survival scenario. So you have slipped out a side exit and hit the streets. You need to get to the train station, but you spot a black SUV idling nearby, possibly a tail. You duck into an alley. Do you take a side route to shake them, or do you steal a vehicle and go on the offensive? What's your first move to get out of Bucharest without getting caught?
I think I have an hour to do it before they close the borders down. So I think I'm going to try and avoid a confrontation, direct action at this stage of the game, unless they somehow corner me in. I'm going to try to avoid going kinetic on this.
Okay, fantastic. Yep. We're basically laying low and not getting too aggressive yet.
Yeah.
All right, so interview question number two. In this book that you guys sent me, Midnight Black, we got Court Gentry has returned, and it seems like something deeply personal is driving him. In the little book jacket, it says that he's repeating the phrase, "She's not dead." Can you tell me a little bit about what does that mean for him and how does it drive the story without giving anything away?
Yeah, of all Court Gentry's skills that he's developed over his career, the last thing that's sort of come to him is his ability to find love, and he has fallen in love with a former Russian intelligence officer, foreign intelligence, their SVR, who herself is was on the run from her own agency, but she has was picked up in Cuba. All my books are standalone. You don't have to read anything previous to know what's going on in here. This book just basically opens up with an American ex-spy trying to get into Russia and rescue his Russian ex-spy. But he is desperate to find her. He believes she's still alive. She knows Russia has her. Most people, like in the CIA that he knows and his Confederates, all think that she would have definitely just been assassinated or executed once she got back into Russia. But he just doesn't, he's not feeling it, and he wants to get in there and find out. So this whole book is about, the book opens up in Bucharest, and he's tried all the easy ways to get into Russia, if there are any easy ways, and now he's scraping the bottom of the barrel, trying to work with the Romanian mafia to get on a smuggling ship headed across the Black Sea. And so you find him in very, very desperate straits, and it's all about trying to find Zoya, who he's madly in love with.
Very cool. Yeah, this one felt, I've read like a couple of them now. I think there's 14 in the series. This one felt, correct me if I'm wrong, but it felt a little like gritty. It felt a little like noirish. Did you
Yeah.
feel like you were writing it kind of like like you mentioned that all the books can stand alone. Did it feel like you were writing in like slightly different style than some of the other ones?
Yes, I like to do that. This book specifically, as I got deeper and deeper into it, and the research I do into the political situation and the police state in Russia, for example, it felt very much like a Cold War type of a story. So I grew up reading Jean Le Carré and Frederick Forsyth and Tom Clancy and Nelson DeMille and Lynn Deaton and all these great Cold War era writers. And I said, I'm going to write my version of like a Cold War novel, although it's very contemporary. At one point in the book, he actually makes contact with some Cold War era resistance leaders to kind of reignite a 30, 40-year-old network of kind of like a rat line to get into Russia. And these are people in their 70s and 80s who are helping him at certain points in the book. So I wanted to have that sort of gritty uh, East Berlin Cold War type feel to the novel, but also have a lot of John Wick action and big cinematic scenes and things of that nature. So that's really exactly what I was going for.
Yeah, amazing. It did feel very cinematic as well and action packed, but it's cool that you mentioned the Cold War because it felt like as I was reading it, it felt very like 70s, 80s, like
Yeah,
noir.
yeah, yeah.
So really, really fun stuff. Okay, let's continue with your survival scenario. You make it to the train station and you find the locker. Inside is a new passport, money, and a dossier on a powerful figure in Russia, someone who may be connected to the setup. Before you can think, someone grabs your shoulder. It's an old friend or maybe an enemy pretending to be one. Do you trust them or do you assume this is another layer of deception?
I mean, if they were an old friend, that makes it tough. I wouldn't. Yeah, that's a tough one. There's something you're going for here, and I'm not feeling it, so I'm not sure. I'm gonna say I'm gonna hear this person out. I'm not going to immediately, put them in a wrist lock and drop them to the ground and run off. I'm going to at least hear that person out. I have a weapon on me now, right? Is that correct?
Yep, yep.
Yeah. So I'm liking my chances a little bit. I will at least, I will at least just see what this person has to say.
Okay, yeah, you're gonna feel into it. Maybe like keep your guard up a little bit,
For
but
sure.
still,
Yeah.
see
Yeah.
if there's anything there for you.
Yeah.
Okay, I like it. I like it. With that, you have earned another interview question. um, Midnight Black. It in the very beginning, like in the first couple pages, you had some quotes in there. One from Alexei Navalny and one from Anna Politkovskaya, I think is how you say her
Yeah.
name.
Yeah.
And they both were, as far as I know, fighters against oppression and taking great risk to fight against that.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, can you talk about why did you choose those quotes from those particular people, and how would you say their messages connect with the new book?
Yeah, so Anna Politkovskaya was a Russian journalist who basically had Putin's number early on and saw what was happening in her country and tried to report honestly about uh, Putin's power grab in the early days. And I think, I can't remember what year, 2006, 2007, Putin had her assassinated. And, it was in the early, maybe 2005, because Litvinenko, he assassinated in 2007, I believe. And so she was one of the first, once he just started basically killing all his enemies, which he does, with on the regular these days. She was one of the first, and I think the quote in there is, sometimes people are killed for, saying what they think, and that is kind of this book is about the darkness that is in Russia these days. It is a police state. I mean, I didn't have to go working hard to make this look like a Cold War novel because what's happening inside of Russia is very similar, with all the different, jackbooted gangs of thugs out there doing the president's, the Kremlin's bidding. So that's why she's in there. Alexei Navalny was a resistance leader. There's a character in the book named Nathan Yarovoy, who is sort of a Alexei Navalny type of a character, and he's imprisoned in Russia, as is Zoya. And Navalny was kind of the last main threat to Putin's democratic uh, elections to the extent that they were all kind of stolen. And but there was a huge popularity for Navalny. Now Navalny's not without his own controversies, so I didn't want to create him exactly for the book. I made this book more hopeful than I actually see the situation over there regarding like Russia in resistance inside of Russia.
Hmm.
So Nathan Yarovoy is a little more pure than Alexei Navalny. I think Navalny was Russia's best chance against Putin, but he's got a few issues of his own. And a lot of these rebel groups, they might be anti-Semitic as well as, hating the Kremlin or whatever. So I didn't want to tie too closely to something as if I'm, you know, advocating for one group or another. But he was also kind of the best chance Russia had when they still had a chance 10, 12, 14 years ago to remain somewhat democratic.
Yeah, yeah. Your books do seem to kind of like ride parallel a lot of the times with like current events.
Yeah.
Do you, just out of sheer curiosity, I know you're like constantly working over there. Do you already have ideas for what's coming next?
Yeah, I'm working on the 15th book now, and it's less geopolitical and more personal. This is a very personal story, Midnight Black, because it's, the hero and the woman that he loves. She's not just a heroine. She's not just like a prop in a prison that he's got to go in there and pluck out of there. She's has a whole lot of agency in what she does herself. So she's a very, very much a main character in this book as well. but I think in the next book, I'm going to go to Northern Ireland and do some research there about the Troubles, and there's definitely some things that have happened in the world that will be involved in the story, but at its core, the story's a little bit more grounded, I think, than geopolitical.
Interesting, interesting. Remind me, is Zoya a new character?
No, she's been around. She hasn't been in every book. She came around book six in the series, and then has been in and out. But the last couple books, Court has, really fallen in love with her. Tried to run off into the sunset for her. That didn't work for them, and it would not have worked for me as a thriller writer for that to have happened either.
Yeah.
But yeah, so she's been in some previous books, but not all of them.
Yeah, yeah. Was there now I'm trying to remember. I haven't seen the movie in a while. Was there a Zoya inspired character in the movie?
No, there was a completely different female lead character in the film, played by Anna de Armas,
Yeah.
and I can't remember her name off the top of my head, but she is not out of the series at all. Zoya is a lot more vulnerable, gritty, tough, maybe less pure of heart. Court is a little bit more of the you know moral compass type, and Zoya is a little more like let's get the job done and get the hell out of here type of a character. So they play off of each other in a fun way for me.
Yeah, nice, nice. Maybe you can or cannot answer this, but are there any other movies in the works?
Yes, definitely there's another movie in the works. I don't know the status of it. I know that they're working on the script. They had a script, and I think they wanted some changes to it. And that was the last new news I've heard. That's been a little while. So I know Ryan Gosling is like one of the most in-demand actors in the world, and so I imagine a lot of it has to do with that. But I know they want to get the script just right.
Yeah, he's like the gray man, and then he goes right off to being Ken, and then he'll be back to being the gray man soon.
Yeah, yeah, he does it all.
Yeah. All right, let's continue with your survival scenario. So, your contact tells you the only way out is through an underground smuggling route, but it's controlled by the mafia. They want something in exchange, one more job before they'll let you leave. Do you take the deal or do you try to run for it?
Well, let's see. It looks like I have documents. So, depending on if I can get to the border in an hour, Bucharest, that's going to be pretty tough to do on a train, but because it's not right there at the border. Um, in my book, trusting the Romanian mob turned out to be a very, very bad choice for court. So I'm going to say that I'm going to actually make a run for it. Whether or not that's the right thing to do or not, I have no idea. But I'm going to not trust them because I wrote them pretty bleak in my in my book.
Yeah, trusting no one is the advice you got at the beginning of the scenario
Exactly.
as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
So with that, you have earned another interview question. So in the book, like we were talking about, the scenes are super cinematic, very intense. They feel very tailor-made for the screen. Can you talk about how do you craft such high tension sequences? Can you tell me a little bit about your process, and do you ever visualize them like a movie while you're writing?
I think I do visualize. It's weird what you do and you don't visualize, or me personally. Like I never flesh out characters' faces. I mean, obviously, I guess you have to picture Ryan Gosling as Court Gentry, which is great. I think he did it fantastic in the role. But like when I'm writing him, I never really see faces. I'm just sort of like seeing what they're seeing, or seeing big picture stuff. The same with Zoya. There's not like an actress that I say, well, that's her, and I'm just patterning it off her. I don't really do that. For action scenes, though, I really do think it through a lot. Um, it's so important, more important than what happens, or equally important as to what happens, is the reader's experience, and whether they can understand this cool scene that you're writing and you're setting up. And if it looks like you're setting it up by, reciting chapters out of a Architectural Digest article or something like that, then that's a mess. You don't want to do that. So you want these kind of 3D spaces for a big action scene. You want them to be something people can relate to, and you can obviously put in descriptive words, but you really want the reader to enjoy the story and not get bogged down in these action scenes. So, yeah, so good piece of advice I got from Joe Russo, the director of the Gray, one of the directors of the Gray Man. I was talking about screenwriting, and he was saying like it's so important. People want to see movies in theaters, and it's so important when you're writing to, as you're writing on the page, think about what's happening up in this corner, what's happening down in this corner, to really like use the space. And he was saying that, I think, very directly, but I taking it as a metaphor for writing, I think was helpful to me because I think about like, okay, can we make this bigger and not make it too complicated? It's 3D. You want a lot of motion, you want a lot of movement, you want action. The other most important thing is you can't do anything that you've done before. If your hero has bungeed out of trouble earlier in the book, they're not going to do it again. They can't, nothing can happen twice. Similar things can happen, or they can go differently. But there's just a lot of little things you think of. My action comes together pretty quickly when I'm writing, and I'm always looking at my word count to see where I am in the story. And when I know I'm about to write a big action scene, I am kind of happy because I'm like, yeah, I'll bang out some words today. A scene where two people are sitting at a coffee shop talking to each other, it could be just as interesting and have just as much tension in it, and it needs to have tension in it. But sometimes that comes together a little slower for me because I'm really trying to think of the whole story and what words are being conveyed. When it's action, I feel like I can I can crank some pages out pretty quickly.
Yeah, cool. When you write, do you work with like an outline? Do you outline first, or do you just start like hammering out pages and then revise, or like what's your process there?
I've always tried to be the guy that can outline really well, and I just am not that guy. And I'm still trying. The first month I've been working on book 15 was really, over Christmas and stuff, I was really starting to like come back here into my office and work on it. I was like, I'm just gonna plot. I'm just gonna plot. I'm not gonna get bogged down in writing scenes because I don't know what the story's about yet. And I really didn't get anything done. And then January 1st, I'm like, all right, now it's time to, you don't even know what it is, but it's time to start writing it. Immediately, I started getting stuff done. Immediately, I started to flesh out bigger ideas for later in the story. So I guess that means I'm a pantser and not a plotter. But I just fantasize about having a book completely thought out, and then I just go paint by numbers for a few months and write it. It's just never happened, and it probably never will. But I'm always, you can always be hopeful the next book's going to come together completely different.
Yeah, interesting. So if you start writing, do you already know like kind of like loosely beginning, middle, and end, or are you like figuring a lot of it out as you write pages?
I mean, for this book right now, I'm figuring 97% of it out. I mean, I have a few things I kind of want to do, and then I'm like literally, I'll have it in my head. Oh, I've always wanted to do a thing on a highway in a traffic jam, an action piece. And it's like, that's just in my head. I don't know why that would be in this book or where that would be in this book or who would be involved. It's just something in my head. And then as a plot, I'm like, I've always wanted to, I wanted to get my hero's father back involved and sort of check in on him, but it has to be very much germane to the story. It's not just going to be some little side quest or anything. So how would he be involved? And then I'll have kind of a macro idea about something that's going on in the world. I'm like, maybe that would be interesting if we could. So it's literally very disorganized and amorphous, and it's not something I can teach. In fact, if I could probably teach people how to do it differently than I do it. In other words, like I on paper I can sort of show you how to plot a book out, but it doesn't really work for me.
Oh, interesting. Do
Yeah.
you sometimes even write things like out of order? Like you're like, oh, this would be a cool set piece or this would be a cool sequence. And then you're just writing like different scenes and sequences. And then do you go back and kind of fit them together like a puzzle sometimes?
Absolutely. I do that with all the time. And I really think that is one of the most important things if you're going to write, especially professionally. You know, people call it writer's block, but it's just not knowing what you're going to do. I mean, I don't think any of us have this really, really great, cool idea. All you need to do is write it out, and you're not going to write it out. You're going to bang that out. So really, writer's block is not knowing where you're going, just being stuck. And so to the extent that you can go, okay, I don't know what happens here, but I know, they're going to get on a ship and somehow go here later in the book. And maybe I don't know all the little pieces of that part, but I can go write it and figure out some of the stuff later. And then there's that connective tissue that you put in later. But that really does. I can write a part of the book that ends up being four-fifths of the way through the story, and it will give me ideas for stuff that you need to use to foreshadow earlier on and all that. So if you have to kind of build up the chops to where you can write wherever you know what's going on, and
Yeah.
then just step away from wherever you're stuck and then come back to it.
I think that's pretty cool. That's kind of inspiring. I never thought about it that way, but like, if someone was getting writer's block, in theory, you could just be like, oh, what I do have this really cool idea for like this scene in my mind is like super cool. I have no idea where it goes in
Yeah,
the story, but
yeah,
like it's almost one way around writer's block is like, well, why don't I just write this really cool scene
yeah.
and then that'll kind of like free up the mind to figure out some ideas. I think that's pretty inspiring.
Yeah, if I was frozen on if I stopped every time I was frozen on something chronologically where I was in the book, I would never, I this is my 26th published novel. I might have three finished because I'm able to go and certain many times the first words I write in a book are not page one. They're something that it's like I know I want to have this conversation between these two characters somewhere down the road. I'll just put that in there. And there's software like Scrivener or something that can help you organize all that stuff. I just do everything in Word. I just have one Word document and I move it around. And that probably wastes time, but I think it helps me order my thoughts a little bit and come up with other ideas that I just have this big sloppy mess that has to slowly take shape. So there's different ways to do it. For me, the way I do it is probably not the most efficient, but it seems like it helps my brain kind of make sense of it.
I was wondering about that too. I'm glad you said that because as you were telling me, I'm like, I wonder if you've got like like 500 different windows open with like, here's a chapter, here's a chapter, here's a
Yeah.
chapter, but it's just like one Word document. And then like, if you figure out something goes somewhere else, you're just like enter, 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 like slide
Yeah.
it down, copy,
Yeah.
paste, delete,
Yeah.
like that kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly like that thing. I'll move stuff around, and then when I'm usually near the end or when I'm actually editing, I will start reading early in the story, and I'll go like, okay, things are a little thin right here, or this part seems a little draggy, but maybe I can move this other part up. It's going to change it. It's going to mean a shift in timelines or a shifting timeline, but that's okay if it keeps the energy of the book the way I want it. I will move timelines around and everything. I'm happy to move text around on a page to make the story better.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. See, I think that to me, that sounds easier than having like 100 different documents open and then becoming very confused. Just like you
It,
got it all
yeah,
there in your document and you can just move, copy, paste,
yeah,
delete, tab, enter, move it around.
yeah.
That's pretty cool. That's kind of inspiring.
I think a lot of people's brains work differently, so I never say, this is the way to do it, but like, after a while you figure like, okay, this isn't easy, but this does seem to work for me, so it's probably it's probably my system, whether or not it's the right system for everybody.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. That's
Yeah.
pretty cool.
Yeah.
If you got a Word document going, like about how many pages in a or word count in a Word document, like how many pages in a Word document would be like what a novel will end up being?
Well, all my books end up 150,000 words or more, and that I wouldn't recommend that to somebody starting out. In fact, my agent, when I first met him, before he agreed to be my agent, he said, "Your word limit for your book is 100,000 words. I do not want to see anything more than 100,000 words because, you're a new author. You need to get in, tell a story. Every page is super important. just really get in and get out. And you can get away with 90,000, you can get away with 80,000. Um, but I think once I started writing Clancy books, my own books just sort of naturally got bigger, and my sweet spot is about 160,000 words. And every year I say, I'm going to make this one 140 because theoretically that would mean I'd get it done faster. Midnight Black, I was way late with this book. This book took much, much longer to write than I anticipated. And I always say, I'm going to ratchet it back, 20,000 words, and it'll still be good. And I get to about 120,000 in, and I'm like, I'm not going to have this done in 20,000 words. It's like, I feel like there's more story that people want to know. And so 160 is about my, you know, sweet spot for this series, and my other series may be a little bit shorter. But if you're starting out, if you're trying to get published, I think that credo still stands. Like if you need it to be 100,000 or less, and just bang out that story, and every page is, the best page it can be.
Amazing. So what are you doing like one book a year? What's your kind of frequency right now?
This year I am turning. I have one book to turn in, and another book that I need to probably write 80 or 90% of. So it's almost a two book a year. I've done 26 books in 15 years, so it's not quite two books a year, but it's darn close. I also
Wow.
did an original audio play in there, and I it feels many years is two books a year. The entire time I was writing Tom Clancy novels, which I did seven of those. I did that in 6 years, and I was also writing Gray Man books. So I will slow down. I think I'm already slowing down some, but it'll never be less than one a year. I can write a book a year. I like that.
Nice. So you
Yeah.
you must like really enjoy the process as well then, huh?
Yeah, well, so it's February now, and in February I enjoy the process because it's new. In July, we have this conversation in July, and it'll be dark in here. I won't have shaved in weeks and weeks, and my dogs will be wanting to go out. I get really stressed late in the process, not just because the due date's coming up, just because there's a part shortly before. I always say if I died with one of my books 98% done, no one would ever be able to publish it because no one would understand it. It's like it takes a couple rounds of edits for it to really look like a book. So that means when I've got 150,000 words, I'm like, what is this crap? It's like this is nothing. I want to just throw this away and give my advance back and leave the country. And then a month later, after a couple rounds of edits, I'm like, yay! I pulled a book out of here. I'm so happy. But um, I'm still only a month into starting this book. I have big ideas I haven't written yet, so I'm hoping this year will go smoother than last year, but we'll see.
What uh what kind of work schedule are you keeping? Do you write every single day? Do you have certain days off? Like how many days per year are you writing?
I would say I write every single day, but that doesn't mean I'm writing 8 hours a day. It's like right now it's mostly publicity, and that's about a 4 week thing, a week of a book tour, and the rest, online. And I will still write throughout the day. I'm also trying to plot out something I'm going to write next year that's not a Gray Man novel, and have some other things that I'm kind of working on. But by the beginning of March, I'm going to get into full-time writing book 15 of The Gray Man, and I will do that 7 days a week. And I will do that as soon as I get up in the morning, as long as I can. So usually till like lunchtime. And then in the afternoons, I do some research, or the other aspects of being a writer that come into play, the business end of it. But I like to do my writing in one sit down, and maybe that's 3 hours, maybe that's 5 hours. Go to a coffee shop or sit here in my office and do the work, and that seems to generate the best product, the most creative product.
That's very cool. And so weekends too. So really, really no
Yeah.
days off. Weekends too. And then would you say 3 hours is the minimum, or are there days where you're like, I'm really not feeling it. Just do like 1 hour today? Or is it like,
Yeah. It's not. I've sat in front of my laptop not feeling it for 8 hours before, so I don't really stop because it's like I'm not motivated. I sort of stop because it's like I have to go to the dentist or I have to take my kid somewhere, or my dog's got to go to the park, or whatever. So but I do. I think 3 hours. I used to be early in my career, if I had 45 minutes, I could just lock into the story. But now it just takes me, I'd like 3 hours to get into the story, be stuck in the story, get something done, and then get out of it. I think that's a good minimum chunk of time. Those days where I look up and realize I've been at work for 5 hours, that's a great feeling. But 3 hours is, I could do two, but three's better.
Yeah. Okay, cool. I'm curious, when did you start writing? And also, when did you first get published? So did you like start writing as a kid, or like when did you really start? And then from when you started, how long did it take you to get something published?
I started writing in 1990, and so I was 22 years old, and I was in college, and I was a huge Tom Clancy fan, and Nelson DeMille, and all these other guys. And I was taking a course in college I was getting a master or a BA in international relations in poli sci, and I was taking a class in the criminal justice department on international terrorism, and I was just reading spy novels all the time. And I just got this idea in class about this terrorist group that was in Lebanon at the time. And I just came up with this like idea for a story. And I remember thinking like, oh, I wish I would have loved to read a book about this. And then I was like, well, maybe I should try and write it. And I wasn't like an English major or anything like that. It was just like a passion for reading and an idea. And so I started writing it. It took me 15 years to write that book because I'd put it down, I'd pick it up, I'd put it down, I'd pick it up, I'd forget about it. I would lose pages, all that. So I finished it in 2005, and I started in 1990. And then I wrote my second book in like 7 months. So it took me 15 years to write the first book because I wasn't working that hard. But once I finished it, I was like, okay, this is a doable thing. Let's just focus. And I did my second book, and I got that in front of an agent, and he said no, but liked the writing. And then I got another book in front of him, and he said no, but I like the writing, and I like this guy, the gray man, who's in this story. If you wrote another story. So my fourth published novel. So I started writing when I was 22. I got published when I had just turned 42. So it took 20 years, but that shouldn't scare anyone off because I probably could have been published by 25 or 26 years old if I'd really applied myself in those early days. It was just that sort of thing where you don't really think it's going to happen. You just do it because it's kind of fun. It's like I like playing soccer. I like to go out and kick the soccer ball. If somebody told me if you worked really, really hard, you could be in the World Cup, I would have worked really, really hard. I just didn't think that was going to happen. And it was the same with writing. So that 20-year period was my own journey, but it doesn't have to be anybody else's.
Yeah, amazing. And you didn't study like you didn't take like classes in like how to write a book per se. It was more
Mm.
like you read a lot of books and then
Yeah,
just kind of gave it a shot.
absolutely. When I look back to my 20s, the the main thing I did in my 20s was read novels.
Mm.
Um, I had a job, but it wasn't anything I wanted to do with my life. I graduated from college, but I was probably had six novels going at a time while I was, in school. So I really, I think by osmosis, by just consuming enough of that stuff, you kind of get a feel for it. And I think you have to have some aptitude, and you have to have some just innate creativity, I guess. I don't know if that's something that can be taught, but really, a lot of what I learned, by just plugging away at one book for so long, I probably made a lot of mistakes, fixed the mistakes, just sort of worked out a lot of kinks on my own. Now, it would have been better if I had taken some classes where somebody goes, "Hey, you're really good at this. You're not good at this. You don't understand this." Um, but I've taught like little workshops, and there's people in there that like, wow, your story's really, really good, but you don't seem to understand the first thing about keeping a consistent point of view, or some like mechanical writing thing. And I'm
Yeah.
like, but you're super creative, but this one little mechanical thing you need to fix, which it's like, I love telling people that because I'm like, that's the easiest thing in the world to fix because that's something tangible. The intangible is, you know, what if your story's not interesting? What if you don't know how to tell a story or you don't have a story or something like that? But if it's something structural, you know, you can learn that in an afternoon. So, um, you know, it's fun to teach people and show them these little tricks.
Very cool. Do you have plans to teach any workshops anytime soon?
I don't have anything set up. I've done it a few years at Thriller Fest. I'll teach just like little workshops where I will read 5 pages of your work, and you know, I always tell the people, I'm like, listen, I'm going to ask you to do something there's no way I would do. It's like I want to read your stuff to the class and show every line edit that I do, everything you know, I will just totally tear your stuff up. Just that's the nature of it, and then show it to everybody. And I'm like, if I took this class before I was published, I would run out the door. Like I would just was too chicken to let anybody do that. But people are great about it, and you learn from seeing other people's what they do right and what they do wrong. And these classes always end up being like really fun. Like it's like a dozen of us, and you know, I think we all kind of learn from each other, and it ends up being kind of fun. But I just ask them at the beginning, I'm like, just forgive me. I'm going to rip you apart. But just so you know, I get ripped apart by copy editors to this day. It's just part of the deal.
Cool. Um, so I know you've worked in the past with Tom Clancy. Is there anything that you learned while working with him that still helps you today?
I think the big Clancy effect for me was just it's not a decision of whether you're going to write wide or deep. You can do both. You know, if the story is interesting, if you're pulling the reader along, you can go nice and deep with a topic or with, you know, a character's backstory or whatever. And you can also go wide with it. You can, you know, have it in 10 locations. You can have 22 different characters. You can do both. It's not an either or thing. You just have to execute it. You know, if you write tension on every page of a book, people are going to read your 600 or 700 page book. Or, you know, if you don't put enough tension in it, they're not going to read your 20 page short story. So it's all in the writing. And I think I used to think like it was just a mechanical trick that you had to write a short book and get in there and get out. And my brain really kind of wants to go deeper into the story, after writing with Clancy, my books just got fatter and more substantive.
Yeah, interesting. Um, if someone is writing a book that's really wide, like you said, and they've got like a lot of characters, would you say it's still very important to always tell it still through the eyes of one character?
No, I mean, you definitely need to have like a main protagonist, but I like to bounce around in POV. I've been stuck in scenes before, and then it just sort of, and I don't really know how to get through this scene. And then it occurs to me, what if I change the POV to some disinterested party who just sees what's going on, and we look at it through those eyes, and it comes from a different perspective. Or let's look at it through the villain's eyes, or let's look at it through, you know, some other person's eyes, and it can kind of re-energize me to write the scene. So I think, you know, the readers need to be oriented around the person they're rooting for, the main protagonist they're rooting for, the person that they latch themselves onto. And that person doesn't have to be a hero. I always use the example of Apocalypse Now, which is a great movie. It doesn't work as a thriller for certain reasons. Like, you know, the ending is like he just sort of gets what he wants without, you know, accomplishing anything of his own. But that's not a criticism of it. It's like one of the greatest films ever. But there's a point in that story, like 85% of the way through, when you're with Colonel Willard and he's your hero and he's the guy you're behind, where he executes an innocent person. He just kills her. And you're already so far along, and you've already latched onto him. You're stuck with him for the remainder of the story, and it's interesting. I think that's sort of like a metaphor about Vietnam or something like that. You know, it's like we weren't necessarily the good guys, but that's who we're rooting for. And so I learned from stuff like that. And so like when you're a writer, you don't have to make your hero Captain America. But you need to have the readers completely latched onto this one character. And you can have 15 POVs, in the story if they're emotionally attached to this one character.
Interesting. Can you think of an example from like any of your books where the POV switches?
Well, yeah, I mean, in all my books, I really like to get people to understand the villains, um, where they're coming from. That doesn't mean root for them or believe they're right, but I want them to believe that this guy would think what he thinks or would do what he does. So I do spend a lot of time in the POV of the villains. The first Gray Man book, not as very different from the movie. There's two villains. There's Lloyd, who Chris Evans played in the movie, and then there's a guy named Kurt Riegel, and Riegel was the tactical boss. He's a German head of security for this company, Laurent Group, and Lloyd is this lawyer whose back's up to against the wall and knows he's going to be killed if he doesn't fulfill this mission. So Regal actually works for Lloyd, but Regal is the real tough guy, and Lloyd is kind of this weenie lawyer who's just evil. And they changed it for the movie for very good reasons. They got Chris Evans to play Lloyd, so of course they're going to beef that part way up, and Regal went away. But I did a lot of the book The Gray Man not in the hero's view, but in Kurt Riegel's view, and maybe even a little bit in Lloyd's view. And I wanted to show that there's tension between the villains. There's tension between the two little girls that Court's trying to rescue. There's some tension there, and their parents. And so these points of view just switch as every chapter is its own story, and that's how I want to tell that little story.
Very cool. Do you ever take a crack at screenwriting?
I did, and I failed miserably. And no one told me I failed. I was like on page 185 and still working on it, and like maybe not even halfway done.
Yeah.
So I turned it into a novel, but I'd like to go back to it. It is working different muscles than than writing long form fiction. My screenwriter friends are like, I don't know how you write a novel, and I'm like, man, I do not know how you can tell that story so in such a full manner with whatever 20,000 words or whatever you've got in a 100-page screenplay.
Yeah, yeah. Just for the listeners, 'cause they may not know, would you agree like a screenplay typically is like 100, maybe 120 pages.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
when
If you're on page 121, you're probably doing something wrong unless you're I don't who's the best screenwriter in the world. I don't know. Like Taylor Sheridan could probably do it, but he doesn't. He writes nice spare stories. But yeah, I was like on page 185 and felt like I had about half the story down, and I was like, this is not working.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So for context for the listeners, 185 pages and halfway there is like it's like wild.
Yeah, yeah. It is not a screenplay.
Yeah, yeah. So what about this audio play? You mentioned you wrote an audio play. What is that like a is that like a narrative podcast or what was that all about?
Yeah, no, it was an actual full cast production. So there was music and sound effects, and it's called Armored. It came out several years ago. I've actually done a novelized version of that, and the audio play was actually optioned for television. So hopefully that'll get developed for TV. But it's about a 6 hour, I think, audio play, and I had to write, all the audio cues. There can be no backstory or exposition or any, like everything has to come out through dialogue or sound effects. And it was a real challenge to write, but it was a very cool exercise. And like 6 hours written that way is quite an undertaking. I think it was 600 and something pages
Wow.
but I think it turned out really well. Yeah.
Nice. If I wanted to check that out, what is that like? Can I find it like on Spotify, YouTube, Apple
On
Podcasts,
on Audible. I think
on
it's only
Audible?
yeah, they produce it. It's the only place it's available. Yeah, it's called Armored.
Very cool. I'd like to check that out. I'm
Yeah.
interested. Um, well, let's get back to your survival scenario. We got into the writing process, which I found very fascinating and inspirational. But I think I got like one or two more survival scenario questions for you in your adventure in Bucharest over here on Can You Survive This podcast. So,
Yeah.
back to the hypothetical. You make it to the docks, your last chance to board a Turkish vessel before Interpol locks down the city. But as you approach, you spot a shadow moving in the fog. Someone is waiting for you on the ship. It could be your escape or your end. Do you board the ship or do you find another way out?
I'm armed. I still like my chances. I think I'm gonna board the ship. I think I'm gonna board the ship and try and get the hell out of there because it's a pretty dicey situation. It yeah, that could go either way, but I like my chances when I'm armed, and especially it's one person, and I don't necessarily like my chances sticking around Bucharest as the net sort of closes down.
Yeah, I like your thinking. You want to try to escape, you're armed, and, if it goes south, it gives you an opportunity for a really cool action sequence on a boat.
Yeah, there you go. Although I've done that like 50 times, so
So we'll say you've earned another interview question with that one. So Court Gentry, he's a very compelling character in modern thriller fiction. Would you say, can you tell us, is he based on any real life individuals or research you've done, or is he purely a creation of your imagination?
he's essentially a creation of my imagination. I initially got the idea for the character when I was in El Salvador on a little vacation. I was studying Spanish in Guatemala, and I just saw a guy in a bar who was an American and was by himself and didn't look like any of the other Americans I saw down there. So I was very much, you know, just a daydreamer and just made up a whole backstory about this dude who's kind of a rough looking dude that he was ex-CIA and living off grid and the agency was after him and he didn't necessarily know why. And I just made up this little backstory, not because I wanted to write a book, just because I was just bored. And pretty quickly I thought about, turning him into like a protagonist in a book.
Very cool. By the way, Court Gentry is a great name for a character. Do you how do you come up with like cool character names, because I feel like a lot of writers are just sitting there like, John Smith, but Court Gentry, great name.
I
How do you come up with this stuff?
I hate that I don't remember where I got his name in particular. I do spend a lot of time thinking about names. And like one thing I'll do if it's a foreign name, I will look at the national volleyball team of Hungary or whatever, and I'll take a first name and a last name that sound good together, and I'll do that. And I just do volleyball because if you did like soccer, people would know the names or maybe even basketball, but like volleyball, I mean, I don't think people know names of the volleyball player in Slovenia or whatever. I do that, but it's always like trying to find names that sound good together, names that are like ethnically correct, and then names that don't sound the same as another name in the book or something
Mhm.
that could lead you astray. So I've actually switched people's names in like the last edit because I'm like, those two names actually sound too much alike. So when I'm being interviewed and somebody might ask me about that character, I don't even know who they're talking about because I literally switched their name, on my last read through the book, which is always tough.
Yeah, cool. Well, in your hypothetical survival scenario, you've boarded the boat and you have escaped. But your past may still be catching up with you. Um, so, as we wrap up the survival scenario, I'm wondering, back to an interview question, do you ever see yourself as a main character in one of your own books?
No, I don't really think that way. People ask me that sometimes, and that doesn't really enter into it. I don't really flesh it out like that. Um, the things that happen to me that are interesting, I might try to incorporate them into a story. But, when I'm writing a story, it's not like I see myself like swinging on a vine over the Amazon River or something like that. I would just get hurt. So I'm the writer.
Yeah. Have you ever been to the Amazon?
I've not been to the Amazon. I've actually been in Brazil, but not up into the Amazon. I'd love to go.
Yeah, cool. Um, so yeah, this is the 14th Gray Man. I'm curious, how do you keep it so fresh without running out of ideas and without phoning in the story? You have any tips on keeping it fresh after 14, almost 15 books?
I think if you care, that's a big deal, and it's like I really don't want the story to get tired and get old, and I don't want I always want to enjoy it, so I try and approach each book a little bit differently. This book was, like I said, sort of a throwback to Cold War stuff, and that was very interesting to me. The book I'm working on now is a very personal story for the hero that I think fans will find very interesting because you learn a bunch of new things, and that's interesting to me. Eventually I'll run out of ideas, but I'm always trying to get, I do all kinds of research to try and get new ideas. So to keep it fresh. So the moment I feel like it's getting repetitive or boring or fans start saying that, I'll probably step away and just try and write something else.
Yeah, cool. Well, my friend, you have survived the podcast, and with your survival, you have earned a plug. So, tell us, when does the book come out? Where can people find you? What do you want to share before we wrap it up?
Well, my website is my name, Mark Greaney, Greaney, books, .com, sorry. And it's everything is there. Book releases February 18th and it should be sold everywhere. I think the audiobook's actually coming out a little bit later this year than the hardcover. But it will be out soon enough as well. And internationally, it'll be out at different times depending on the country.
Amazing, my friend. Well, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Always enjoy it.